ready. People get ready. People get ready. Are you ready? Are you ready? People get ready. People get ready. Are you ready? Are you ready? People get ready. Yeah, let's get ready. Oh, it's coming back. Jesus is coming back. Jesus is coming back. No, don't you give up. Jesus is coming back. Jesus is coming back. And when the world gets complicated, we're gonna keep on celebrating. 'Cause we know, yeah we know, Jesus is coming back. Jesus is coming back. Are you ready now? Are you ready now? Yeah. We just wanna celebrate it. Are you ready? Jesus is coming back. Jesus is coming back. So keep your head up. Keep your head up. Jesus is coming back. Jesus is coming back.
Yeah, he is. He's coming back. You can count on it. He said he was coming back. The scriptures teach that he's coming back. And to help us get ready for his return, we're in a 5-week series entitled The Last Days. Now, I've got the Last Days title over a picture of the city of Jerusalem because the scriptures teach, Jesus taught, that everything that happens in the last days will center around the city of Jerusalem and Israel and the Jews. Now, a more detailed or specific title for our series would be this. What, not just the last days, but in the next slide, what Jesus said about the last days in Matthew chapter 24. Now, as Matthew tells us about what Jesus said, he sets it up with a conversation that Jesus had with his disciples concerning the temple. This is a picture of the temple in Jesus' days. The city of Jerusalem was in this direction. The temple is on the east side of the city. Jesus said someday, he said to the disciples, someday this temple is going to be torn down. There won't be one stone left standing upon another. Well, that got the disciples' attention. They just were trying to take it in. So they went up on the Mount of Olives, which is this hill to the east of the temple, and they asked him some questions. Here are the questions that they asked him. Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So Jesus answers their questions as we read through Matthew 24, as we're going through it verse by verse during this series. So let me summarize what he's going to tell them, what he does tell them with this timeline. He said, there's coming a time of tribulation that will precede my return to the earth to establish my kingdom. He talks about that tribulation, and we know from other scriptures it's going to last for 7 years. After he talks about the tribulation, he tells them that there's going to be an event called the rapture. We call it the rapture. He says there's coming a day where those that have believed in him for everlasting life are going to go up to meet him in the air. If you've believed in Jesus for everlasting life and the rapture comes in your lifetime, which it could, all of a sudden, one day, you're just going to be caught up to meet Jesus in the air. And then after the rapture, we'll begin that 7-year time of tribulation. Jesus starts by talking to them about the tribulation. And we looked at what he said, a lot of what he said last week. And there are 6 words that summarize what he said last week. He said that there will be deceivers, wars, disasters, persecutions, survivors, and witnesses. Now, he's going to continue talking about the tribulation, but he zeroes in on one topic. It could be summarized right here, the villains. There are going to be villains that arise during the second half of the tribulation. Now, in the book of Revelation, we're told specifically the titles of these 3 villains. They are, as we read in Revelation 16:13, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. Again, in chapter 20, verse 10, they're mentioned the devil, the beast, and the false prophet. You can see there, the dragon is the same as the devil. That's 2 titles for the same one. Jesus talks about these 3 villains in Matthew 24. He talks about them in this order: the beast, the dragon, the false prophet. Later in the New Testament, we read these titles for these villains. Also, they have other titles. For example, The beast is also called the man of sin. The dragon, as we saw, is also called the devil. False prophet, another title for him is the Antichrist. Jesus talks about these three villains, but he doesn't mention their titles. Jesus talks about them, and then writers of the New Testament later give us their titles. This morning we're going to see that Jesus first starts talking about this first villain that's later referred to as the beast or the man of sin. Here's what he says in verse 15. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, and then Matthew says, whoever reads, let him understand. When Jesus says, when you see, he's talking about people living during the tribulation. When you see something standing in the holy place, well, the holy place could only be the temple. What Jesus is saying there is, I just told you that the temple's going to be destroyed. But in the future tribulation, there will be a new temple and something will be standing there. And what it will be an abomination of desolation. Well, those are two pretty big words, so I thought I'd look them up in the dictionary for myself, but also for all of us. Here's what the word abomination means. Something exceptionally loathsome, sinful, wicked, vile, and disgusting. Desolation means devastation, gloom, misery, ruin, and sadness. So something really bad is going to happen that's going to lead to all kind of misery and sadness. That's the abomination of desolation. Going back to the verse. Someday there's going to be an abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. Matthew says, whoever reads, let him understand. Well, how are we going to understand? There's not enough information here. Well, Matthew gives us a clue. It's the clue that he wrote is the clue that Jesus gave us. Daniel the prophet. What I'm talking about here, you can understand more if you go back to Daniel, the book of Daniel, the prophet who talked about these things. So that's what we're going to do next. Matthew says, if you want to understand, go back to Daniel. So we're going back to Daniel 9, verse 26. Daniel says, the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now the city is the city of Jerusalem, the sanctuary is the temple. Listen, Daniel predicted the destruction of the temple 600 years before Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple. And Daniel predicted 600 years before that there would be a certain people that would destroy the city and the sanctuary, and we know that that's what happened. In 70 AD, the Romans, that's the people that destroyed the city and the sanctuary. In 70 AD, they came in and destroyed the city, they destroyed the temple, and they were led by this prince who is to come, and his name was Titus. Titus was the general of the Roman armies that destroyed the city and the temple. He later became the emperor of Rome. And of course, the city and the sanctuary is the city of Jerusalem and the temple. So going back to the picture, Jesus predicted the same thing that Daniel predicted, that someday that temple's going to be destroyed. It happened in 70 AD at the hands of the Romans led by Titus. Here's a picture of the Temple Mountain, the same area that you saw in the previous picture. You can kind of see the remnants of the walls here. And it's in ruins, except there's a Muslim shrine called the Dome of the Rock. And over here, that black roof is the roof of the mosque called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Two Muslim structures on the Temple Mount that was dedicated to the worship of the God of Israel. And this is what you see today as a result of what Jesus predicted, what Daniel had predicted, it came to pass. So let's go back to what Daniel said then I can move on to the next verse. The people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Next verse. Then they shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Now the destruction of the temple has already happened. It happened 2,000 years ago. But what we're reading here has not yet happened. This future prophecy about a time that they will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Who are the they? Well, the people he just was talking about, the Romans. The same people that destroyed the city and the temple in 70 AD, they, the remnants or the descendants of the Romans, are going to confirm a covenant. And I'm going to put up here next. This covenant has to do with a temple, a covenant for a rebuilt or new temple. The reason we know that Daniel's talking about a temple, because later in the verse he says that this has to do with sacrifice and offering, a place where there will be sacrifice and offerings. Now get this. The Romans who destroyed the temple, their descendants are the ones that are going to come and make a covenant with Israel to rebuild a temple, a new temple. So let's think about, I want to picture for you, who are these Romans? Who are the people that are going to make this covenant for a new temple that has not yet been built? Here are the boundaries of what was once the Roman Empire, with modern day names of countries that fit within the boundaries of the Roman Empire. You know, the Roman Empire later became two parts, the eastern part and the western part. And someday there will be people from what was once the Roman Empire that will make this covenant to rebuild a temple. Now, in the book of Daniel, Daniel is even more specific in a previous chapter when he said this: 10 kings will rise from this kingdom. Someday, 10 kings or leaders of countries will arise out of what was once the Roman Empire. So let's go back to the map and let me kind of talk to you about what Daniel's talking about. He said, someday, 5 leaders from 5 countries in the west, 5 leaders from 5 countries in the east, for a total of 10. 10 leaders of countries or kings are going to make a covenant with Israel to allow them to rebuild and worship in this new temple. So let me give you some examples. I don't know which 10 they will be. I'm just going to give you some examples. It could be that the day will come that the leaders of Spain, France, Italy, Germany, and the United Kingdom, along with the leaders of Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Romania, maybe even Russia, which was a little bit within the boundaries of the old Roman Empire. These 10 kings will make a covenant with Israel concerning this new temple. That's what Daniel said. Let's go back to the verse. Then they, 10 Roman kings, will confirm a covenant for a temple with many for 1 week. Well, what do these other terms mean? Well, shall confirm means that, I think that's in the next slide. There it is. They will make strong. They will make strong this covenant with many. The many would be Israel. That's in the next slide. Here we go. There it is. With Israel for 1 week, which would be 7 years. You say, well, that's not, 1 week isn't 7 years. It's 7 days, except for the fact that the Hebrew just says 7. So is it 7 days? Or is it 7 years? Is it a week of days or a week of years? Well, it can't be 7 days. I mean, that wouldn't make much sense. A temple that they can worship in for 7 days? No, it's 7 years, because that's exactly the time frame of what is the tribulation. But this covenant will be made. These 10 Roman kings, or from the remnants of the Roman Empire, these 10 kings will guarantee, stand behind, make an agreement that they're going to stand behind Israel's rights to build and worship in a new temple. Let me show you that on the timeline. This covenant with Israel will be made for seven-year guarantee that these 10 kings stand behind. Now, the rapture occurs on the first day that the tribulation begins. The covenant with Israel will be made strong or go into effect on the first day that the tribulation begins. That's going to be a busy day, isn't it? Same day of the rapture, same day the tribulation begins, same day that this covenant is made strong. Now, we might not learn about this covenant until the day that it's announced. It's possible that you and I could live to see it being talked about and planned, and then on this day, that covenant goes into effect. It's made strong. Let's go back to our picture of the Temple Mount as it looks today. Someday, there's going to be a Jewish temple rebuilt on that Temple Mount. Some have suggested that means that Muslim shrine's got to be torn down, maybe even the Muslim mosque. I don't know. It could be that that's not going to happen. It could be that the temple will be built up there on this Temple Mount to coexist with these other structures. There's 37 acres up here. That's a lot of land. There's plenty of room to build a Jewish temple and not tear these down. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just saying that's a possibility. As a matter of fact, I want to give you an example of something like this that's just happened in about a year ago. Here's what happened about a year ago. I want to show you a map of Israel, arrow pointing toward Israel, another arrow pointing toward the United Arab Emirates. A couple of famous cities in the United Arab Emirates. Maybe you've heard of Dubai or Abu Dhabi. In the city of Abu Dhabi, there had been a plan for a number of years to build what you see in this next picture, a place where there would be a modern church, a modern synagogue, and a modern mosque. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all together in one spot. It's called the Abrahamic family house because all of these religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, they say they all came from Abraham. So in the UAE, they said, let's build this place where all three can be celebrated and united as one. All right? So there you have an example of different buildings coexisting on the same spot. Going back to the picture of the Temple Mount, maybe that's what's going to happen. Maybe there will be a temple built that coexists with Muslim structures. Now, I just want to quickly say, maybe not. Maybe those will be torn down, and then the Jewish temple will stand there by itself. I don't know, but either one of those are possible. One thing I do know for sure is because of the words of Jesus and the words of Daniel and other scriptures, there will be a temple built on that spot someday. So let's go back to Daniel 9:27. With all that background, I want to read what we've already read and then go on to continue what he says in Daniel 9:20, what Daniel says in verse 27. Then they, 10 Roman kings, shall confirm or make strong a covenant for a temple with many Israel for 1 week or 7 years. And then the verse goes on to say this. But in the middle of the week, 7 years, they, the 10 kings, shall bring an end to sacrifice and offerings. So the 10 kings make an agreement. Jews, you can build this temple, you can worship in it for 7 years. At the very midpoint of the tribulation, 3.5 years in, they say, no, we changed our minds. It's got to stop. We're going to put an end to sacrifice and offering. No more can the Jews worship God through sacrifice and offerings in this temple. Now, why would they do that? Well, we don't have to guess because we're told in the book of Revelation, chapter 17, verse 13. 10 kings will give their power and authority to the beast. They're going to say, we're going to give our allegiance to this man called the beast. And he is the one that we're working with now, and the beast has directed that temple worship of the Jews should stop, and we're putting an end to it because we've given our power and authority to this man that's called the beast. Now, I want to show you on the map where this beast will come from. I don't have the scriptures for you, but there are other scriptures that tell us he will be an Assyrian. And the Assyrians are a known group of people. There are about 5 million of them in the world that are identified in the world. And they primarily are centered in northern Iraq, which is the most eastern part of the old Roman Empire. So I'm pointing right here to where the Assyrians are in northern Iraq. This beast, this man will be, he's called the Assyrian, and he will come out of northern Iraq, And he is the one that Jesus is referring to, the one Daniel prophesied, the one that I just read about in the book of Revelation. And the kings will give their power and authority to the beast. Let me review what we just read before I go on. In the middle of the week, 7 years, they, the 10 kings, shall bring an end to sacrifice and offerings. These kings will give their power and authority to the beast. What will the beast do? What will this man do when the sacrifices are stopped for the Jews and they give their power and authority to him? Well, here's what he'll do, as Daniel goes on in verse 27. On the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, and that one, the New Testament identifies as the beast. The beast will make desolate. It will be an abomination. What will he do? Well, later in Daniel, we read this, chapter 12, verse 11. The daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up. Well, what is that? It's still not clear. What is this abomination of desolation? Again, we don't have to guess because Paul tells us in his letter to the Thessalonians what this is going to be. The man of sin sits as God in the temple of God. There it is. The beast is also referred to as the man of sin. What's he going to do? He's going to come into that Jewish temple and say, I'm God. The God of the Jews is not the true God. I am God, and I am sitting in the temple of God. I have taken over, and I am the one to be worshiped. And you worship me, he says to the whole world, or else. And here's what's going to happen, as we read in Revelation 13:8. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life. Those whose names have been written in the book of life are those that believe in Jesus for everlasting life. So when it says all will worship him, that's with the exception of those that believe in Jesus for eternal life. You see, there's going to be a division. Those that believe in Jesus and those that follow the beast. So all that is behind the explanation, and all that is to try to explain one verse that Jesus said in Matthew 24. Here's the verse where we started. Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, and then Matthew says, whoever reads, let him understand. That's what I've been trying to do for the last I don't know how many minutes, is to help us understand what Jesus meant in those 4 lines. And even Matthew said, you're going to have to do some cross-referencing here if you want to get it. You're going to have to go back to Daniel, and then you can look other places as well. That's what I've tried to do, is to lay out what Jesus was referring to here. He didn't mention him by name, but he was talking about the beast, the man of sin. Let's put those villains back up here. Jesus has talked about the beast, the man of sin. Next, Jesus is going to refer to the dragon or the devil, even though he doesn't mention him by name or title, but that's who he's going to talk about. And what I want to say before we look at it is that the beast works hand in hand with the dragon. This Assyrian, this beast, this man of sin, is going to be working hand in hand with the devil, the dragon. He's the devil's man. The beast is the devil's man to carry out his will. And here's what Jesus says. When Jesus says, when you see this abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, here's what you better do. Here's what you better do. Here it is. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Get away. Because the beast and the dragon, the devil, are going to move at that point to try to destroy the Jews. That's why Jesus tells the Jews, you better get out. You better run. Why would Satan want to destroy the Jews? Why would the beast want to destroy the Jews? Well, I'll tell you very briefly and very quickly. God has a plan. Satan wants to frustrate God's plan. God has a plan. Satan knows what that plan is because Satan knows his Bible better than I do. Satan knows what the Bible says about the future, and Satan's going to do everything he can to frustrate what God has foretold about the future. Because God's plan is that someday the Jews, during the tribulation, are going to believe in Jesus for eternal life and call out for his return. Satan doesn't want Jesus to return. Satan wants to continue to rule this world. Jesus called him the ruler of this world. He doesn't want to give up his rule to Jesus. He doesn't want Jesus to come back. And Satan knows if he can destroy the Jews, that would frustrate the plan of God, and Jesus couldn't return because Jesus can only return in fulfillment of that prophecy. And so, Jesus is telling the Jews, you better flee, you better run to the wilderness. Now, in the book of Revelation, the book of Revelation picks up on that prophecy of Jesus, where it says the woman, Israel, fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God. Now, Jesus said, go to the mountains. This verse says, go to the wilderness. That's the same thing in the mind of a Jew. The mountains to the east, that's the same as the wilderness to the east. And let me show you that on a map. Now, here's the city of Jerusalem, and here's the Dead Sea and the Jordan River. And between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea, there's wilderness or mountains. On the other side of the Jordan, there are wilderness and mountains. So what Jesus is saying is, when you see the abomination of desolation in Jerusalem, let all those in Judea get across, flee to those mountains, flee to that wilderness, get away, because he's going to try to kill you. And so they do. Let me show you a picture of some of the wilderness, some of the mountains to the east of Jerusalem. Here's what it looks like to the east of Jerusalem. Mountains, wilderness. By the way, this green here is the city of Jericho down there in the Jordan Valley. Up here is the Jordan River. Here's an arrow pointing to the Jordan River. Maybe you can see it up there at least. Let's go to the next slide. There it is. That's the Jordan River. So the Jews are going to flee past Jericho, past the Jordan, and go over to those mountains to the east. Many of the Jews will. And this movement to get away, to run, is what Jesus continued to talk about back in Matthew chapter 24. Listen to what he said. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. The intensity of persecution from the beast and the dragon will be so intense that Jesus says if the days weren't shortened, not only would the Jews be destroyed, but through the plagues that are happening during the tribulation, everybody on earth would die. But those days are shortened at the second coming, at the end of the tribulation, exactly the 7 years. Now, here's something that Jesus doesn't elaborate on, but if you read in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, you can read about it. When those Jews flee, the beast and the dragon send armies out to go to try and catch those Jews and destroy those Jews so they can't get away. God sends an earthquake to swallow them up in this earthquake and cut them off. And how does Satan, the dragon, feel about that? He's really, really mad. In fact, that's what we read next. The dragon was enraged with the woman. The woman is a term for Israel in the imagery of Revelation 12. He's so mad that he couldn't get to those Jews that were protected by God that went out into the wilderness. That he has another target that's mentioned in verses 16 and 17. The dragon went to make war with the rest of her offspring, the Jews, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus had earlier referred to, and I talked about it last week, there will be 144,000 Jews that are sealed for ministry with the testimony of Jesus Christ. During the second half of the tribulation, these 144,000 Jews will take the saving message of Jesus to every nation in the world. Everybody in the world is going to hear the saving message of Jesus to believe in him for everlasting life. And a multitude of people from every nation will believe in Jesus for everlasting life. And Satan hates that idea. And he's going to do everything he can to track down those that have that testimony, those 144,000, in order to kill them. Of course, God's going to protect them, and God's going to see that they continue to carry that testimony. But all that is behind what Jesus is just briefly referring to in Matthew 24 about the dragon, the devil. He's mentioned, in, as we summarize where we've been, he talked about the beast, he's talked about the dragon. Now Jesus will focus on the false prophet. Even though he doesn't mention him by title or name, that's who ultimately has in mind in what Jesus says next in Matthew 24. He says, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. During the second half of the tribulation, there will be those that say, well, I'm the Christ, I'm the Messiah, I'm the one you should follow. But Jesus said, don't believe it. If somebody says he is or says he's over there, don't believe him. Because he goes on to say, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Satan has the power to empower people to do miracles. As he says there, signs and wonders. And that satanic power will deceive many people into thinking, well, that's who we should follow. He gives his allegiance to the beast. Well, maybe the beast is the one with the power. Maybe he's the one that we should worship and follow. And they will try to deceive people all over the world, but even the Jews. And then Jesus goes on to say, go back. I wanted to go back. Jesus is talking about false Christs and false prophets, plural. You notice plural? But Jesus and the New Testament have in mind one particular false prophet that the book of Revelation talks about. Now I want to go forward to Revelation 19:20. The false prophet, singular. Out of all those false prophets, there's one in particular who will work signs by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshiped his image. One false prophet will be especially given the power to do signs and wonders in order to draw people's worship toward the beast and ultimately toward the dragon. Now, this false prophet has a specific title that's mentioned in the letter of 1 John, chapter 4, verses 1 and 3. John says, many false prophets have gone out into the world. That's true right now. We've got false prophets all over our world right now. But he says, these false prophets have the spirit of the coming Antichrist, singular. Antichrist, the one who is coming, called the Antichrist. Notice the connection to the false prophets. The Antichrist is a title for the false prophet. Now, for some of you that have studied Bible prophecy or read things, I want you to hear what I'm saying because sometimes this gets confusing. Oftentimes, the term Antichrist is applied to the beast. That's a mistake. The scriptures don't teach that. The term Antichrist applies to the false prophet. So all that is behind what Jesus said in Matthew 24. Let's look at it again. Verse 24. False Christs and false prophets will rise, show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. And then he goes on to say, see, I've told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, here in the desert, here he is, he's in the desert, do not go out. Or look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. Jesus said, during the tribulation, there's going to be saying, here's the guy we need to follow, he's out in the desert. No, here's the guy we need to follow, he's over here at this house that we need to go to. Jesus said, don't believe any of that. because the true Messiah is me. And when I come, you're not going to find me in the desert. You're not going to find me with a meeting at the city hall. Here's how you're going to see me when I come. As lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Next week, we're going to see that he's going to tell them, as he tells us, there's going to be a blackout. Everything's going to go dark. And all of a sudden, it's going to be this bright, shining light in the sky like lightning flashing from the east to the west. And that's Jesus coming back in his glory. You can't miss him. He's not going to be in the desert. He's not going to be hiding in a room or having a secret meeting in a room. He's going to make himself known when he returns, that there will be no mistaking that this is the Christ coming back to the earth. And we're going to get into that, what he says about his return, next week. But today, the focus has been on the villains. He's talked about them, even though he didn't mention them by name or title. He talked about the beast. He talked about the dragon. He talked about the false prophets. And I want to say something that all of these villains have in common. And it has to do with what I want to put up here next. The villains and the Jews. These villains have something in common, and that's their hatred of the Jews and their intense desire to destroy the Jews. The Jews will be target number one of the beast and the dragon and the false prophet during the tribulation. But God's in control, and God has a plan. And God's going to use even these villains to accomplish his purpose for the Jews during the tribulation. God's not going to be up there in heaven and say, oh, I'm so upset, I wish I could do something. God's saying, I'm in control, I've got a plan, and I'm using even these villains to accomplish my purpose for the Jews. And this is God's purpose for the Jews during the tribulation, found in Jeremiah 30, verse 7. The tribulation is the time of Jacob's trouble. Jacob is another name for Israel. It's the time of the trouble for the Jews, but he, Jacob, the Jews, will be saved out of it. God knows that it's through that tribulation that the Jews will turn to Jesus and cry.